For today, I will be the first speaker. We will have 3 speeches. We'll be talking about Windows monitoring, different Windows monitoring topics. And I will start with an introduction because the first thing that we have to do if we wish to monitor Windows is deploying and configuring our agent, and not simply deploying and configuring it, but acknowledging what we can do with it, right? How to configure it, how to deploy it. Can we confirm zabbixmeetuponline is the tag? Someone asked me. Yes, it's zabbixmeetuponline, one word, just as the question in the Q&A asked. Yes, that's correct. So yes, we'll start with the agent and general Windows monitoring. Then we will dive deeper into event log monitoring and WMI. So let's begin with Windows monitoring. So what I'm going to be covering in my presentation, we will start with simple things, downloading and installing the Zabbix agent on Windows. Then we will talk about how does the Windows agent configuration differ from Linux agent configuration, what's specific about it. Then we will take a look at Windows-specific Zabbix agent item keys. Then we will look at the templates that come out of the box for monitoring Windows. Then we will briefly look at ways how we can extend Zabbix agent on Windows and what's unique when it comes to extending Zabbix agent for Windows. And then some general questions and troubleshooting, just sort of revising what we discussed and answering your kind of most common questions. And then, of course, Q&A. So let's start with downloading and installing the Zabbix agent. So both Zabbix agent and Zabbix agent 2, so we have 2 of them. One is written in C, the other is written in Go language. There are some differences. They are available for download on Windows. Both of these agents are available in MSI packaging and regular archive. The pre-compiled binaries are available for AMD 64 and i386 CPU architectures, and they are available with or without OpenSSL encryption support. Most of the time, you'll probably be interested in the OpenSSL version. You can also compile Zabbix agent or Zabbix agent 2 on Windows if for some reason you wish to maybe make some changes in the code and compile it. We have instructions in our documentation page. So I have the link at the bottom. Like I said, these PowerPoint presentations, they'll be published in the coming days. Then you can click on it and open the documentation page yourself and look at it. There are quite a few steps to compiling the agent on Windows, especially if you're used to compiling it on Linux, which is extremely simple, actually. On Windows, it's a bit more complex. There are a few more steps involved. So it can take you a while. It can get messy on Windows. So you're probably familiar with our download page. What we do here is we select distribution. We're talking about Windows. So we select Windows. All pretty much of Windows versions are supported. Hardware, like I said, the CPU architecture, Zabbix version, the encryption, and the packaging. Once we select all of these, we can then select the minor release, 6.01, 6.02, and so on. Then we click download, and we either download the zip archive or the MSI package, and we're good to go. First, let's talk about MSI packages. They're a bit more new. So initially, way back in the day, we had only zip archives available, and the only way you could install Zabbix was from command line. Now you can also install it from the MSI packages. So the instructions are self-explanatory. You have to agree to a license agreement. Then you have to provide your host name, your Zabbix server IP and DNS, your agent listen port, and server proxy for active checks. So these will be populated in the configuration file. You can also enable or disable pre-shared key, and then if you enable it, you'll have to populate pre-shared key settings, and you can add the agent location to your path. Then you can select which components to install. Sender and get are optional, though I do recommend installing them most of the time. Useful for troubleshooting, really lightweight binary files. I don't see a reason why you shouldn't deploy them. And then if you have provided PSK, this is if you have ticked in this PSK checkbox, and then this is the next screen that you'll see. You have to provide the pre-shared key identity for your agent and the pre-shared key value. The pre-shared key with its pre-shared key value will be stored in the root of the C drive, if I'm not mistaken, in the PSK key file. Oh no, in the agent directory. Sorry, in the agent directory, in the psk.key file. The identity will be passed to the Zabbix agent configuration file, and the value of the TLS connect and TLS accept parameters will be set to PSK. So the agent will be configured and ready to accept PSK connections. Next up, let me just quickly take a look at the chat. If there are any comments, maybe something isn't working. No, everything looks okay. Next up, we can also install MSI packages from a command line, which is really nice because from the command line, we can configure some additional details, right? We can configure TLS parameters. We can configure log parameters, timeout parameters for Zabbix agent to the persistent buffer parameters, allow and deny keys, and more. So this way, we can actually very nicely, and this is Windows specific, distribute our agent, for example, by using Windows group policies or logon scripts, right? And just install it from the command line if it's not installed yet with our custom configuration. And this is really great when it comes to automation. And here I have a link to installing Zabbix from MSI that contains the different parameters that can be passed to it when you're installing it from the command line. So this is how it looks, installing MSI package from command line. This is optional. I assume that most of you will, I mean, depends how skilled you are, but if you're not looking for automation, you won't use this. You will simply open the MSI package, click next, and provide necessary parameters. But if you wish to dabble with automation and make things easier for yourselves, then this is how it could look like. You see, we're passing different parameters, TLS parameters, setting up the install folder, providing host name, server active settings, and so on. Installing from the archive. So this is the legacy way. The archive contains two directories, config and bin. The config directory contains the default Zabbix agent configuration file, and the bin directory contains the binary files for the agent, the sender, and get. If you're not familiar with those tools, just do a search in our documentation for Zabbix sender and Zabbix get, and you'll learn what they do. We have, by the way, updated our documentation, so it works a lot better now, gives you better results, highlights what's needed, what you have searched for, and so on. So to install the agent, we have to open our command line and pass the install option to our agent binary. By default, the Zabbix agent will create a log file in the root of the C drive. So this is something that you don't want to miss out on. If you're thinking, where is my log file after I have installed my agent from the archives? It'll be in the C drive. By default, if you just pass the install option, it will also try to locate the Zabbix agent configuration also in the root of the C drive. And we can see it here. I have installed it. I can see that the binary file is in E drive, but it's looking for the config in the root of the C drive. If you wish to point it at a different location, at a different configuration file, then you need to pass the config option. Config, and then your configuration file. So here I'm executing Zabbix agent, binary file, passing the config, and my config file is located in program files, Zabbix conf, zabbixagent.conf, and then passing install. So be careful with this. This may be not very intuitive because it doesn't tell you where it's looking for anything, right? By default, you have to know it. So just take that into account. It looks for these things in the root of the C drive, even if the agent is located on a different drive. Okay, so we have installed it. Once we have installed it, we will see that we have a new service. We have a Zabbix agent service. Zabbix agent runs as a service on Windows. By default, it's named Zabbix agent. If for some reason, which is an extremely rare use case, we wish to install multiple Zabbix agents, we can do so. And in that case, we have to pass the multiple agents option when we're installing the Zabbix agents. What this will do, it will add the agent host name obtained from the config file to the service name, because we cannot have multiple services named the same way when also listening to the same port on the same port. Here you can see I have my custom agent name, Zabbix agent Windows host, grabbed from the config file. What are use cases for installing agent versus agent 2 on Windows systems? So we'll cover this at the end. I'll talk about it. This isn't necessarily related to Windows monitoring, but yeah, we'll talk about it later at the end of the presentation. So we can start and stop the service either from the command line or from the services section, right? If you've worked a bit with Windows, you're probably aware of it. By default, the agent service startup type is automatic, starts as soon as you boot your Windows. By default, the Zabbix agent service runs under the local system account. And the Zabbix agent service can be uninstalled by passing the uninstall command line option to the binary file, or if you have installed it from the MSI package, you can just go to your programs and whatever was it, settings in Windows, and just click on install there on the Zabbix agent, and it will remove the service. So multiple settings can be changed on the service level, the service user, the startup type, recovery settings, and more. It's a regular Windows service, just as any other. So we can also run the Zabbix service under a different user. A couple of things here. So if we do not wish to run it under the local service account, we need to make sure that the user can read the agent config file. We need to make sure that the user has sufficient permissions to manage the Zabbix service. And we need to make sure that the user has sufficient permissions to collect the required metrics. Someone's saying that the audio isn't working in the chat. Please let me know. Can you still hear me fine, everyone? Yeah, just let's take a... Okay, yeah, audio is good. Thank you. Yeah, so let's take a look at some of the error messages, some troubleshooting. So let's say I'm trying to run Zabbix with a different user, and I did this with a guest user, or yeah, I think it was a guest user on Windows. When I tried starting it, I received this here error message: could not start Zabbix agent, process terminated unexpectedly. What I did is I opened the agent log file, and I actually saw that apparently Zabbix cannot initialize performance counter collector. So that sort of pointed me in the right direction. I gave the necessary permissions for this user to read the performance counter information, and then I was able to start the agent, right? So take a look at the log files. When I created an admin user, I was able to start the agent with the user, no problem whatsoever. But with guest user, I needed to do some tweaking. Another thing, if we're, for example, trying to read a file, so we have an item, for example, that reads file contents, and the user doesn't have access to the file, we might see something like this. This is where the nice test feature is extremely helpful. So create an item before you actually create it, press test, then try to get the value, and it will tell you permission denied. So very, very explicit error message, tells you what's wrong with it. So make sure that the user has read permissions on the file. All right, so this is sort of the basic setup of deploying Zabbix agents. Now let's look at what we can actually get out of it, right? What sort of things we can get out of it. So we have some unique keys that are OS specific. Windows is no exception in this case. So we have some Linux specific keys, BSD specific keys. Now we're talking about Windows. So event log monitoring keys, right? Something that we will cover in another presentation today. We have performance counter keys, keys that can collect performance counter values. We have an item key that can collect information about a process. We can discover and monitor Windows services. We can obtain WMI queries, query results, right, with WMI get, and we can monitor virtual memory size. And there are a bunch more, but these are sort of general ones. So most of them use Windows features, are related to Windows, and can be extremely useful. And here you can see I have a link at the bottom for Windows specific keys, right? You can open this link once again. Presentations will be published in a few days, and then, or just look up in documentation, just Windows specific keys, and you'll find it. I'll talk about a few of them, just a quick look, but we'll have a presentation dedicated to this in a moment. So something that's unique for Windows is WMI monitoring, Windows management instrumentation. WMI is a way how Windows provides a standardized model to access management information. And Zabbix can obtain information about a WMI instance by using WMI query language. Here at the bottom, we can see an example of this query language, right? We point at an instance of a physical drive, the status of the first physical drive. So WMI get status from disk drives where name is physical drive 0. We have two keys for this, WMI get and WMI get all. WMI get will return the first match of our query. WMI get all returns the whole response as a JSON object. So all of the matches, and those can then be used in discovery. Take a look at low-level discovery and documentation. I will also have some examples down the line, but it's a quite complex topic. We covered extensively in trainings. When you can use custom JSONs to automatically discover entities from those JSONs and monitor them. So this is what WMI get all can be used for. And similarly, we can also monitor performance counters. Performance counters provide an interface for collecting OS level metrics, general metrics such as CPU, memory, disk usage statistics. And we can monitor with zabbixagent individual performance counters and a list of performance counter objects for low-level discovery. And once again, we obtain multiple performance counters and then discover entities from what we obtained and monitor them. One caveat here is performance counter string names can vary between languages, and that's why we have a key that has the en suffix, which references the English name. It is sort of recommended to use it because English name, most of the time, it's sort of a lingua franca, and you can sort of rely on using it. But you can also use the regular perf counter keys and refer to performance counters in your own language if you are using any other locale than English. So we have covered the basic sort of custom approaches that are specific to Windows. Next up, I would like to take a look at Windows monitoring templates, what you can get out of the box. There are quite a few of them, and we're talking only about the agent templates, right? So template for CPU monitoring, file system monitoring, a generic monitoring template that provides different version informations and sort of a couple of items that don't fall under any other umbrellas. Memory monitoring, network monitoring, physical disk drive monitoring, service monitoring, and if you have deployed Windows, an SNMP agent on your Windows environment, this is not related to agent, but I had to mention it here. There is a Windows SNMP template for SNMP agents deployed on Windows hosts. The templates utilize a mix of standard agent keys, WMI queries, and performance counter information. Each template will most likely have a mix of all of these. Some templates contain static items. If it's just a static value, there's nothing to discover, while others rely on low-level discovery. For example, the service template. This is the service template over here, Windows Services. It relies fully on discovery rules. There is a discovery rule, service discovery. It discovers services and then creates the item state of service for each service based on this here item prototype. So somewhat automated. All you need to do is just apply the template on your host and boom, your services will get discovered. But don't forget that, for example, like I said, for WMI, we will obtain data with WMI get all. We will obtain data in JSON, and then we have to define, depending on what kind of data we obtain, our own low-level discovery macros here in the LLD macros tab. We can also use JavaScript pre-processing to achieve this, but I prefer using LLD macros. It's a bit more visible to someone who doesn't know JavaScript. So this is if we're just getting a JSON, unformatted JSON, and we wish to use it for discovery. With services, it's different. With services, it's all fully automated. With WMI get all requires a bit of manual work. A common question is, for example, with service discovery, why am I discovering so many services? Or why am I not discovering a specific service? So don't forget to click on your discovery rule and click on the filter section here, right? Because we filter which services we discover based on these here rules. And over here, we use macros. Service name should match the value of this macro, shouldn't match the value of this macro. Service startup name should match the value of the service startup macro and not match name of service startup not matches macro. So check the user macros for their values, customize them to your needs based on your requirements to exclude or include the discovery of different services. This is, if you've worked with Zabbix for a longer time period, this is common knowledge, but if you're new, This can be quite confusing. I do understand it, but take a look at the user macros section on your host and see what the values of these macros are. And then you can sort of see, okay, I'm discovering these services, not discovering those services. And that's sort of how it works. This, we can talk about level discovery essentially in a separate webinar. We have, like I said, a separate day dedicated to it and trainings. It's a complex topic, but I just decided I had to briefly mention it here. What about extending Zabbix agent on Windows? So there are multiple ways how we can extend Zabbix agent on both Windows and Unix-like operating systems, but we'll talk about Windows specifics in a moment. So we can execute scripts and commands with user parameters. As we saw initially when we were downloading our agent, we have Zabbix Sender available on Windows that can send custom metrics to the Zabbix server, not related to agent, but still extending on Windows. We have system run item, agent item that can execute any command or script. And this can also be used to populate your host name item or host metadata item, as opposed to user parameters. We can create new modules for the C agent, and we can create new plugins for the Go agent if you can write code in C or Go. Since Zabbix agent is language agnostic, and we're on Windows here, we can actually use PowerShell to obtain some extra information. For example, I used this script, not my script, downloaded it from the web, but it worked. Just plug and play and create a new item for it, and user parameter and a new item for it. It obtains the number of days since the last Windows update has been performed. Here's the script. Here's the user parameter. I am creating essentially a new reference to an item called update days, and I'm executing PowerShell and pointing it at this script. And there we go. 12 days since I last updated my machine. A new custom item, right? So don't forget, depending on the OS, on the environment that you're on, utilize what's available on that environment. In our case, it's PowerShell. So, but any other language will do. You can use Python on Windows or whatever else. So a couple of kind of finishing slides, troubleshooting and questions. So for troubleshooting, if you're getting interrupted system call errors, check your Windows firewall when you're starting your agent. If you're getting something like this, or not when you're starting, but you're trying to connect to your agent, you're getting interrupted system call, check if your firewall is active. Check your log files for errors. By default, these are the log file is stored in C drive. Make sure that your Zabbix agent service is started, of course, right? It runs as a service. Make sure that it's running. Don't forget, not every item key is supported on every OS. If you search our documentation, keys or items supported by OS, you will find a page that contains a list of items supported by operating system. If Windows performance counters, and I've seen this, are reporting wrong values, try rebuilding them. This is a Windows issue, not a Zabbix issue, but I have provided a Microsoft link over here on how to rebuild performance counters. Then next up, Zabbix agent common questions. So can I run multiple instances of a Zabbix agent on a single machine? Yes, I can. Of course you can, but remember you need to point each agent in their own config file because they need to listen on their own individual ports. And also they need to have their own unique service names, and we need to pass the multiple agents option to our agent when installing them. Can I define a user parameter in a separate config file on Windows? Yes, you can. There is an include directive, the include option in the Zabbix agent config file, and you can say include specific directories or specific files, and there you can provide different configuration parameters, including user parameters. How can I automate Zabbix agent deployment on Windows? Try using logon scripts, group policies with the Zabbix agent MSI package, or you can also do this with the archived version with the binary file, no problem. But MSI is a bit more elegant. Then, if you wish for us to help you, these are the final couple of slides. If you wish for us to help you with maybe deploying Windows monitoring on your environment, create a custom template for you, right, with user parameters or scripts or custom integrations, this is what our Zabbix services are for. We're here to help you, to assist you, to support you. So take a look at our services, be it Windows, Linux, any other environment. We can do a turnkey for you, upgrade for you, create a custom template for you. document all of it and teach you a thing or two about Zabbix along the way. We also have many free resources. This is one of our events, meetups. There will be more to come. So take a look at our events section to see what's coming. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have handy tips. We have series. We have meetup recordings, many other things available there. So a source of free information and use cases and analysis. Then we also have a newsletter that you can sign up for on our homepage. And there's also our blog with technical how-tos, case studies, feature overviews, and much more. All of that is free. And of course, our social network resources, such as Zabbix forums, Reddit, Facebook, LinkedIn, and much more. So that's pretty much it. And let's take a look at the Q&A. What are use cases? So for installing Zabbix Agent versus Agent 2. Agent 2 has some items, let's say, that are not available on the regular agent. That's one thing. Agent 2 also has some extra features. For example, Agent 2 has persistent storage for active checks. While C agent can store metrics only in memory, Agent 2 can also store metrics in a SQLite database. So if you're, for example, you shut down your agent, if it's a Go agent, it will still keep the metrics that were collected but weren't sent to the server. So a couple of differences like that. Generally speaking, Go agent is a bit more advanced. Is there a recommended way to provide some routine to install on multiple hosts? There really isn't a recommended way. It's up to you how you do it. We don't necessarily, we're very agnostic when it comes to that. So yeah, can't really say that there's anything necessarily that we recommend when it comes to automating and creating a routine for installing agent on multiple hosts. Back when I was working in my previous working place, I was essentially using just group policies and installing Zabbix agents and different software that way. Matches versus does not match priorities. So how do those work? It will check against both of those. So both of those need to be true essentially for the entity to be discovered. Both of those need to be true. The service needs to be the one that matches the matches ones, and it does not need to be the one. It doesn't need to be the one that does not match macro or filter. When updating Zabbix Agent on Windows, my user parameters are deleted from the config file. So after every upgrade, I have to open Zabbix Agent config. Actually, that's a good question. How are you updating it? I guess you're overwriting the config file, right? Or maybe reinstalling it from MSI. I guess maybe that's another way. Yeah, probably. Back up your config file just in case, then copy it back and you'll be good to go. So just back up your config file. Generally speaking, good practice. Back up the config file before every upgrade. And you can then replace it and you'll be just fine. Just override it and you'll be fine. How easy it is to manage a server agentlessly depends on what's available on the server. We can use Zabbix. Well, manage or monitor is the question. Managing, probably a bit more complex, and that isn't necessarily what Zabbix would do. We could use some scripting from the Zabbix proxy or Zabbix server and invoke something on the server itself, connect to the server, invoke some scripts and manage it. But it depends. Is SNMP available? Is IPMI available, right? Are any other protocols that Zabbix can natively communicate with available? What about scripting? So I wouldn't say that it's too complex. It gets done out there quite commonly because you can't install agent everywhere, of course, maybe due to security policies. But agent is, of course, more plug and play. Does Zabbix integrate with SQL Server? What do you mean integrate? Can Zabbix monitor SQL Server? Yes. MySQL, Microsoft SQL, yes, and it can do so natively. And we do have templates for it, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, it definitely can do so, even agentlessly, by the way, with ODBC, I've done so myself. Can we execute remote commands through Zabbix proxy for Windows? Zabbix proxy cannot be installed on Windows, so that will be a no. Can we monitor services working on Windows? Exchange servers or even Exchange database for replication state. So services as in Windows services, they can be monitored As for services as in different applications, we need to check if we have templates for those. Then we can monitor them natively. If we don't have templates for those, usually there'll be a performance counter or some WMI information or native tools that we can use together with zabbixagent to monitor those. So yeah, I've seen Exchange servers being monitored. There are also templates for other Windows services. So yes, we can. So yeah, just running MSI file about the config overrides. Yeah, that back up your config file and then just override it back. Maybe if you're doing it in an automated fashion, then have a script that maybe after the MSI package has finished installing, just it copies over the old config file, backs it up before the install, and then copies it over after the install. Are you able to use the zabbixagent to run commands based on an alert, like restart a service if it stops? Yes, we can. That's we're talking about actions over here. Yes, we can do just that. Can we also do a certain level of hardware monitoring Windows agent? So mostly only as much as the OS exposes, right? If it's exposed via OS, then we can monitor it. If it's not really exposed, then not much. If there is maybe a tool that knows how to communicate with the hardware drivers or things like that, like a separate tool, then we can create user parameters that could access that tool from the agent side and obtain metrics from there. That's something that gets quite commonly done. So we could, yes. When is the 6.0.2 agent MSI package? When will it be released? Not sure if it hasn't been released, by the way. Don't recall. Maybe try looking between the with encryption and without encryption. I'll actually check after the presentation if it's not released. There can be some delay between versions, but should be very soon in any case. Any day now if it's not there yet. All right. And that's it. We have some discussion in the chat that you guys feel free to join in.